Welcome back to Small College Conversations. My name's Jim Abbott. I'm the founder of the Business of Small College Athletics. And today I'm joined by Dr. Miriam Merrill, the athletic director at Pomona-Pitzer. Miriam, thanks so much for your time today.
Jim, thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm very happy to have you. I think you have a unique story and lots of great insight to share. I love to kind of start these conversations asking people, how they got their start in athletics, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about your journey to your current position.
Sure. So I was a student athlete. Actually, I'll start whenever I was little because I think sport played a really critical role for me. I was horribly shy as a kid, and my parents were like, we've got to figure out how to get her to talk outside the home. And so they enrolled me in biddy ball in like fifth grade. I ended up being kind of good. And then over time, because I was a good athlete, gained a little bit more confidence. I think that has really been kind of the cornerstone and the reason why I work in athletics, because it was such a game changer for me. So from high school, I went to the University of Cincinnati, was a track and field athlete there. I actually played AAU basketball, thought I was going to college to play basketball, but went to the University of Cincinnati, loved the campus, and said, this is where I belong. So track and field is what I did. Ended up not having too bad of a career. Once I was done, I was like, you know what? I think I'm ready to be done with athletics. So I worked at a Kaplan test prep for a while and then missed athletics. So then decided to go back, get my master's at Xavier. From there, I moved to Chicago and then worked for the National Football Foundation for a while. I coached track and field for about 10 years and then decided I wanted to have more of an impact. So I was first an administrator at Daly College, which is a community college in Chicago. Really realized that 2 years just wasn't enough for me to have an impact or create culture, because every 2 years you're having to restart that. And so I thought, you know what, actually, this is a good time for me to go back to school and get my PhD. So spent time as a full-time student at Temple, and then knew that I wanted to get back into administration. So at that time, started to think about four-year institutions. So I ended up being hired at Hamilton College, which is where I was the associate athletic director. And that actually started my love for the private liberal arts institution. And from there, served as the interim athletic director when our athletic director had went out on medical leave. And then after that, you kind of gain confidence, like, I think I can do this. So the job here at Pomona-Pitzer opened up. I mean, it is one of the top 2 institutions in the nation with a great athletic department, and lucky enough to be here 4.5 years.
Well, I think you undersold your collegiate athletic career. I think you said, I did pretty good, when in fact, you were a decorated student athlete. And, I wonder, in my case, Miriam, I was a longtime athletic director who never coached. Now, I played collegiate sports, but in your case, you were both a student athlete and a coach. And I just wonder if you might share a little bit about how those experiences influence how you lead your department now.
Yeah, great question. I think as a student athlete, I can identify with what it's like to have to balance your time. Now, I think it's unfair for me to say my experience was exactly like my student athletes today, because I think there's a lot of different pressures that they're dealing with that I didn't necessarily have to. But I do think I understand what it's like to have to balance all of these things that we're going through. I also not only was a student athlete, but I joined a sorority. I was a member of a women's honorary organization. So I was doing a lot of different things in conjunction with being a student and being an athlete. So I think that's certainly helpful. I think coaching is good because helping coaches manage teams, and what I always say is I just help leaders lead. It really gives me a sense, an exact sense of what they're going through when they're talking about, changing culture or introducing new things or being able to help develop them as leaders, because those are all things that I have done. I think it's just easier for me to pull from the examples that I've had to be able to do that work. But to your point, Jim, does somebody have to be an athlete and a coach to do the job? The answer is no. I'll actually say while those two things were helpful for me, really it was the work in my PhD of understanding people. So the psychology of human movement, which is also sports psychology, I think that really preps me for the work that I do as an administrator, because I am managing people all the time. People think, oh, your job is great, you just get to go to games. Yeah, that's like 5% of my job, right? So I think really understanding people is what's critical here.
Yeah, no, I love it. It's the fact that you have a PhD. What I admire about it now, what I would say as an old school AD is, you don't need a PhD to be an athletic director.
No.
But what I think you do need, and what I think a PhD is evidence of, is an inquisitiveness and a desire to keep learning and growing. I went to a small liberal arts college undergraduate, and I kind of would jokingly say that I know a little bit about a lot of things as a result. But I just appreciate people like you that are determined to keep learning and growing. And I think as you're leading leaders, that trait is one, if you can pass it along successfully, it'll take you a long way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Well, you mentioned that you work at one of the top institutions in the country, when in fact, your department is actually sort of a hybrid of two separate colleges, Pomona College and Pitzer College.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about that. What's that like? What are the pros and cons, and what goes into it?
Yeah. So, it is two separate institutions. So oftentimes when I talk, I refer to us as, one athletics department, which is certainly, one of the top athletics departments in the nation. But it really is. And people don't necessarily understand the consortium. So there really are 5 colleges here. So 3 of them make up CMS, or Claremont-Mudd-Scripps, and then 2 of them make up Pomona-Pitzer. So Pomona College, Pitzer College, they both have their own presidents, both have their own student affairs, advancement departments. So it really is working for 2 separate institutions. And not only do they kind of operate separately in a lot of ways, they are very different institutionally, right? So on the Pitzer side, they're very much into core values, so sustainability, social justice, right? Those are very core to the values that they hold as an institution. And then on the Pomona side, it's a bit more of a traditional liberal arts institution, in that, the kind of academic setting, and not that Pitzer doesn't have high academic standards, because they absolutely do. They just also require kind of this leaning into their values, which can be different. The challenge here is that all of our athletic spaces are on Pomona's campus, and so we have to try really hard to make sure that we talk about Pomona-Pitzer, and to also have a presence on Pitzer's campus. So to give folks an understanding, in order to get to Pitzer's campus from Pomona, I have to cross through Claremont-McKenna, right, which is our rival. So I think being intentional about being visible on Pitzer's campus is something that we continue to work through. So it's, sometimes it's making sure that whenever we have away games, that the buses aren't only picking up and dropping off at Pitzer, right? At Pomona. But what will happen is oftentimes our Pitzer students will come down, eat dinner, and then they'll leave. But again, when drop-offs happen, we're dropping off at both institutions. We've also had department meetings at both institutions, right? Just to make sure that we are more visible on both campuses.
Yeah, it sounds so unique, and I'm sure you're used to it. It's just the normal way of doing things. But I wonder, from a reporting standpoint, you have dual reporting lines. Is that?
I do. Yeah. So on the Pomona side, I report up through the Dean of Faculty, because we are faculty members, one of the largest academic departments on campus, and the only department that sees all of our students on campus on the Pomona side. And then on the Pitzer side, I report up through the Chief of Staff. It used to be Student Affairs, but it is now Chief of Staff, which has been a great kind of report up on the Pitzer side.
Interesting. Well, so you work in a unique campus setting. Talk a little bit about what some of the priorities are for Pomona-Pitzer athletics, and maybe how you help coaches define success in their programs.
Yeah. I think one of the benefits of kind of joining Pomona-Pitzer at this specific time, or when I did 4.5 years ago, even though it was in the middle of the pandemic, is this energy of success that has started on our campuses. We had both groups of trustees that really said, hey, how can we be more competitive? And so both institutions have really leaned into what it takes to be successful. And one of the things that I'm also very proud of is not only do we have a lot of national champions, whether it be cross country, women's water polo, men's water polo, we also have quite a few teams who have had the highest GPA in the NCAA or the highest GPA in Division III. This past year, we also had our first Woman of the Year, which is just a miraculous award for us to win. So I think thinking about this energy and success is making sure that our coaches have the tools that they need in order to be successful. What it requires to kind of continue to be successful, particularly where we're at in the region in the U.S. We're the only Division III conference in California. We have our neighbors up north, which is UC Santa Cruz, and they're in the Coast to Coast Conference. But outside of that, our athletes are getting on flights to be able to compete outside. So in order for us to stay competitive, like we're having to think about travel, but it's not get on a bus and go 3 hours, it's get on a flight and go 5 hours, 6 hours, right? So how do we kind of be able to support that while maintaining success is something that I'm always thinking about.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. It can be a wonderful thing when the governing agency of your institutions decides that competitive success is important. It's even better when they're willing to fund it. And so I think your answer, I'm just going to be honest, your answer kind of surprises me a little bit because in Division III, and I realize you all take a holistic approach and it's about retaining and graduating and it sounds like the academic success happens for you naturally. But ultimately, having that alignment with the leadership of the institution is absolutely critical. And I'm sure that doesn't always happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is why, like I said, when I came in 2020 or when I was going through the interview process, to hear folks really talk about how it was important that, our students are great in their classrooms, right? And to also say, we also want to be great in this other space, because oftentimes, I shouldn't say oftentimes, sometimes institutions that are, academically challenging will sometimes shy away from wanting to have success in athletics as if they can't happen at the same time, right? And I think, institutions that are at the top of the Learfield Cup show that they actually can be the same thing, right? And that doesn't have to be something that we shy away from, because you can be smart and you can be athletic. So I'm just grateful to be at two institutions that really believe that.
Yeah, well, it's a beautiful thing because, often faculty do generalize athletic success with some sort of lack of academic integrity or lack of academic focus. So the fact that you truly are able to achieve both is really, what our jobs are all about.
Absolutely. And you make a good point. I think what happens is oftentimes, if our faculty haven't been at a small private liberal arts or an institution that is like ours, and maybe you got their terminal degree from, a Research One institution, which is often a Division I institution, right? That feels very different than what it really is here. And so for them to carry on this understanding of what athletics is something that we work to kind of make sure that they understand that, like, your experience at wherever, Ohio State, is not the same thing as here, right? So we work really hard at that. And I think also being faculty on the Pomona side helps that, because they get to kind of work with us and see the balance that we're trying to strike here.
Yeah, I love it. It's not always someone's experience on a large campus. It may be their exposure to social media, whether they read Sports Illustrated, any of these types of things. You talked a little bit about, I'm not sure if I should call it a challenge or just a reality, that when in your case, you're geographically isolated to some extent. And so talk a little bit just about Division III in general. And what do you see as some of the real pluses of being Division III and maybe some of the challenges?
Yeah, I think the pluses are that when the NCAA talks about the student athlete, I think Division III really matches up to that definition. So I think that's great, right? When we talk about this immature model, about students doing it for the love of the sport. One of the things that I always do is I thank my student athletes at the end of the year, because what I tell them is I realize that you wake up and choose to do what you do every day. And because you do what you love every day, I get to do what I love every day. And that only happens because they choose to do the sport. So those are the things that I really enjoy about Division III. Also, our students are having a very well-rounded experience. So our student athletes are studying away or studying abroad at the same rates of our general student body, right? And that really means that they are having a balance in their athletic experience and their academic and social experiences. And that's really important.
Yeah.
So I think those are the great things. The challenge is what's going to happen with Division I, right? And how will that trickle down? I think one of the things that we've got to think about is try to think 5 steps ahead. In worst case scenario is if things were to change and some of the money that we've had historically is no longer there, how do we survive? And I think we're seeing that now with some of the institutions and some of the conferences thinking about sponsorships with media, right? And ours is one of them. The SCIAC is now behind a paywall with Flow Sports, and that sponsorship was really about forecasting where we probably need to start to move as Division III, so it's not this reactive, response to like, oh my gosh, these institutions have broken off, and now where's the money going to come from? So I think that's one challenge that I would think about.
Well, there's no doubt, and you're just a little ahead of me, because that really was my next question. There has been a lot of change. I mean, we live in a time, Miriam, where Stanford is in the same athletic conference as Miami.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense.
Right.
And those schools, like it or not, have an awful lot of power to make decisions that could impact smaller schools. So you're already trying to look ahead, but let's just say worst case scenario, something does occur to the NCAA's primary revenue source, which is the basketball tournament. What could you see coming as a result of that, or what are some thoughts on where we could be in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think when I answer that question, it's about let's think about it in a positive moment as opposed to like, oh no, right? I think if we get to a point and we just aren't structurally ready for the financial burden of what that might mean, I think that means we compete regionally for a couple of years until we can figure that part out. But again, I think right now it's critical for us to capture quantitative data about who is watching, how they're watching, and how that could potentially leverage what revenues might get lost if folks decide to leave us. Because I think ultimately, we have people enjoy sports, right? Whether that's high school sports. I was talking to a colleague of mine who was talking about her son's baseball team, and they were streaming baseball games behind a paywall. And I think he might be in grade school, right? So I think this is something that a lot of people are thinking about. And so it doesn't behoove us to be late in the game thinking about what happens if folks decide to leave the NCAA.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you're thinking this way. In my mind, at a time when we see some of the world doing things that are nonsensical, we might have the opportunity to do things that make more sense. And when you talk about competing regionally, well, what I know, what you know, is there are a significant number of smaller colleges that sponsor varsity athletics in California, and particularly Southern California. So I just kind of wonder if, and hope, trying to spin this from a positive standpoint, if there will be some changing of alliances that enables us to still allow kids to pursue their passion, still get a great education, still compete. But maybe it's not I'm D2, you're D3, and they're NAI. It may just be that we're all small colleges with similar missions, and let's work together to make this happen.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great idea, especially because of the number of NAIAs and Division twos in the area, I think it makes sense long term to really think about how we might rethink this particular structure that we're in. Yeah.
Well, I always said if there weren't problems or opportunities, they wouldn't need me, and
Right.
and,
Right.
and I'm really glad that we have you there
Thank you.
to sort of prepare for the future and deal with it the best that you can.
Hmm. Hmm.
I want to switch gears, and this is like a big switch of gears because I met you earlier this semester at a BOSCA regional workshop that we hosted in Southern California. What I love about these events is I get to meet people like you. And just a different audience at every one of these events. At that regional workshop, you co-presented a session with Kyle Ferguson from Fresno Pacific University. And the topic of the presentation was restorative justice. And I just have to tell you, it was so good. And I have attended many sessions, and very few sort of light the fire and make me think differently. Yours did.
Thank you.
It's not fair in just a few minutes to ask you to sort of share a little bit more about the topic, but would you share just for our listeners a little bit about how on your campus you all utilize restorative justice to deal with, potentially issues with student athletes or staff?
Sure. Before I go into that, I do want to give a quick shout out to the BOSCA regional conference. I mean, it was great, and and just that I am late to the game, making it to it, right? So one of the things that I pushed is a couple of folks in my department who couldn't go to actually go to the national convention. So for those of you out there who have not gone yet, I'm saying it is absolutely worth your time. So there's my plug. So restorative justice. So restorative justice is a way, or I'll start with kind of the larger picture. Restorative principles or restorative practices are really about connecting individuals, building community, increasing empathy. There was a book that I read a couple of years ago. I think it's called What Happened to You? And it's about how, traumas, sometimes people don't really like that word, but things happen early on in life and how that sets us up to perceive and connect or not connect with others later on. One of the things that it said in the book is our students today, our young people today are 30% less empathetic than they were, I think it was like 10 years ago. And so I think we see that, right, with social media and the pandemic, the ways we weren't really able to connect with each other, we've starting to lose something. And so restorative practices is a way to combat that and that we are connected. So one of the things that we do restorative principle wise is all of our head coaches meetings, department meetings, my meetings with student athletes, they're always in circle. So what that means is everybody can see each other. Whenever there's something to be discussed, there's something that we use called a talking piece that goes around, which allows everybody to have input. Oftentimes if we're discussing, there might be 2 or 3 people that pop in and take over the conversation. But in this format, it allows everyone to really participate. So those are kind of the restorative principles that allow us to do restorative justice. So restorative justice is when a harm or conflict happens. So something happens and people are upset about it, have questions about it, feel a certain way about it. We have a process by which everyone can connect, hold the person accountable. There are also ways that we can hold people accountable when it's not one person or when it's this kind of outside entity. But what I appreciate about restorative justice is it gives agency. So not only are we going to connect with someone or something that has caused us harm, but we also talk about as a community, how do we move forward with this? The example that I always give, so we do a RJ 101 with our student athletes so they know exactly what it is and what they can expect from it. Let's say that I stepped on your foot, Jim, right? You may want a response from me that I might not be thinking about. And what restorative justice allows us to do is for you to give voice to what you need in the moment after I step on your foot, and not a policy that says what you need from it, right? So that's what I really appreciate about this is people's needs actually get met. So we had an issue that happened, oh gosh, probably 4.5 years ago, yeah, right when I started, in the way that we engaged the person who caused the harm, the community members who were all a part of that harm, they were able to say, this is what I need in order for you to make this better for me. And at the end, the student agreed to write a letter of apology, to also meet with anyone who felt like they were harmed by him up until he had graduated. So it really was a process that allowed us to basically heal and not still kind of hold on to this thing that happened because this policy said he needed to X, Y, and Z. The last thing about restorative justice that I think is, really critical is that, it really involves the community, and it really pushes back against this cancel culture. So what I always tell people is on a higher ed campus, we should cancel things, and certainly in my department, we can cancel things, but not people, because this is a place where people should be able to learn, be accountable, and have the capacity to change if that's what's necessary. Now, there are two ways that we may not use restorative justice. One is hazing, because I tell my student athletes, you know better, we do an educational process around it, don't do it. And the other one is if the person who has caused the harm says, I don't know what you're talking about, or I don't care, then there's no room for us to talk about you having accountability. But outside of that, we will use RJ for everything that happens within our department. And sometimes it's hard for students, right? When they want you gone from a team, or they want to see you punished, but it's really recreating this narrative that we don't throw people away.
Well, I put you on the spot, and it seems impossible to really give restorative justice in just a few minutes. But what I really took from it was, if we agree on core values, it's not just written on a wall, we're going to live it.
Absolutely.
And so if we say people are important, then we're not just going to throw them away.
Yeah.
At a time where we can all like or unlike or follow or unfollow or instantaneously be rid of something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I just want to say again that I love it. And you mentioned you had a great experience at the BOSCA event. I'd love to get you back to kind of share more of your wisdom, because I really personally found it enlightening for me. And as someone like you who wants to keep learning and growing, it's good to be enlightened from time to time.
I appreciate that. I feel special.
Well, I want to close with again sort of a different direction, but as I think about the young people that I get to work with in a variety of capacities and have gotten to work with over the years, I wonder what advice you might give to a track athlete at the University of Cincinnati right now who maybe has an inkling that they might want to work in athletics. How would you tell them to approach it, and maybe what would you tell them to do?
Yeah, I think I've got two things that I would have them think about. One is be great at what you're doing right now. I think oftentimes folks get out of education, get into athletics, and was like, I want to be an AD. Yes, and do the job that you are in, right? Because you're not going to come out of undergrad being an athletic director. And so whatever job or whatever avenue is your path to that position, do well and work hard in that moment. Because if you're not doing good work, then it's going to be hard for people to see you in that role moving forward. That also kind of maybe connects to my second point, which is it is about a network. I do not sit here as an AD because I'm this great person, right? It really is a lot of people who I have asked questions about studied. Hey, what are you doing? What should I be doing? It really is about my network. I heard somebody, and I can't remember who it is that I need to cite, who said it's not about who knows you, or it's not about who you know, it's about who knows you, right? Because it's about somebody who says, so-and-so is in your pool, and they're worth you giving them a call, right? So, which is why it's important to do the good work in the moment, as well as having a network. I think the last thing I'll add about a network is sometimes folks who are new in the business think that they have to hold on to mentors throughout the longevity of their career. and mentors come and go in seasons, and that's okay. So knowing that you might stay connected to a mentor for 5 years, for a year, for 2 months, and that's okay. But making sure that you are staying connected to that mentor regularly whenever it makes sense, and then transitioning out of that kind of mentor relationship when it makes sense as well. So those are the things I'd add.
Yeah, I love that. Miriam, one day you have a mentor and the next day you are the mentor.
Yeah.
I have very little patience for athletic administrators who don't take the time to respond to those people who reach out. How can you build a network if folks won't take the time to talk to you? And so I agree 100% with your advice. I think experience is always better than theory. So, you don't necessarily need a degree in sports administration. If you want to be an AD, I think you'd agree that you probably at least need a master's degree, just kind of a minimum.
Yep.
But, we have seen so much change. We see a lot of turnover in our business. I think for young people who take the time to talk to ADs about their path to the job, some of them might realize, you know what, maybe I don't want to be an athletic director.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you'd agree, not every day is sunshine and rainbows. But as I said earlier, if there weren't some challenges, they probably wouldn't need us.
Exactly. And what do they say? Everybody wants to be an AD until it's time to be an AD.
Well, Miriam, I am so impressed with you and so grateful for your time. Thanks for joining me today to share a little bit of your wisdom. And I can't tell you how much I look forward to the next time that I get to be around you. So thank you.
Thank you. The pleasure's been mine. And absolutely, you let me know when the next time that we can connect, and I'm there.
Well, thanks. That's another edition of Small College Conversations, brought to you by BOSCA and our friends at collegesports.jobs.